Hello, 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 greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of green across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back, my dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, to the study. Hello there. Congratulations on getting first, FT Wastes. Uh, hello there, FT Wastes. Huh, he said nothing of the dog. I suppose I didn't. Oh my dear goodness. I should have said something about the dog. Hmm. Hello there, Julian20. Welcome. Woof. Hello there, Kintron. For shame. Oh my goodness. Am I not gonna be able to live this down the rest of the night? Hello there, Dr. Zadium, welcome. Hello there, Private Maverick, welcome. And hello there, Firefly, welcome, 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 one and all. How are all you marvelous, wonderful scholars doing this fine evening, afternoon, or morning, or afternoon? I said afternoon twice, I don't know why. But how are you all doing? I'm so glad to see you all here. Julian20, fabulous. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Oh, I'm always glad to hear my scholars doing well. FT Wastes, I'll be honest, I could be better, but I think a story is just what I need. Well, I hope this story can bring a little comfort to you. And I hope you do feel better. Private Maverick doing good. That's good to hear. Oh, and before I forget, we must welcome our newest scholar, Lykios Radia, I think is the proper name. Thank you and welcome to our fine family of scholars. Always happy to have new followers and new viewers because I do this all for you, my wonderful dear scholars. Oh my goodness! We already have a raid. Oh, thank you for the raid, Ezra Fell. Oh my goodness. Welcome, Raiders. Oh my goodness. Welcome, Ezraphel. Welcome. Thank you for the follow, Kool-Aid Man 09637. Welcome. Welcome, Third of Decium. Welcome, Dino Gain 139. Welcome, Nirokusku. Hello there. Hello there. Oh my goodness. Thank you for the follow, New. I'm fumbling over my words. Nico Rokusku. I can't. I am fumbling over my words tonight. Oh my goodness. Thank you all. Thank you for the welcome. And let's give a fine shout out to Ezrafel, if I can do this right. Welcome all of you. Ezrafel, what were you doing before you raided our fine study? I am curious. I'm really curious. What were you doing, Ezrafel? If I am not prying, of course. I never like to pry. That's just the sort of person that I am. Streaming art. You are working on a new model. Oh my goodness. That sounds wonderful. I'm really excited to see it. I'm sure it will be absolutely marvelous. Julian20. You love art. Oh my goodness. I'm sure Ezrafel is just amazing. Oh my goodness. But thank you and welcome, dear Raiders. Welcome to the study. Little introduction. I am Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian. I am a reading, and variety streamer. I do gaming streams on Tuesdays, reading streams on Thursdays, and sometimes the odd stream on Fridays, Sundays. And, yes, and this is Horace, my friend, companion, assistant. Well, yes, you are technically an assistant, Horace. Let's not talk about that. We'll talk about it later. And, yes, welcome. Dino Gain workshopping the new Halo. Oh, interesting. This sounds so fascinating. I love hearing about all this stuff. But I digress. Tonight, my dear scholars, we Ezra felt, I definitely did spend 3 hours on just the halo of my angel. Well, good work takes time. And the more time, if you need, if it takes time to do something well, takes that time. So where was I? Oh yes, tonight, my dear scholars, we are reading and hopefully finishing Jerome K. Jerome's Three Men in a Boat. To say nothing of the dog. For those who have not heard it, Three Men in a Boat is well, it originally was a travel log written in 1889, which described traveling down the river in a small boat for a day trip. The thing is, Jerome K. Jerome had a tendency to add many different humorous little side stories to it, to the point that the humorous parts overtook the actual serious moments. So it is a very funny book, and we've been having quite a lot of fun reading it. I can't remember where we last left off on in terms of what happened. Um, oh yes, I remember. Harris got drunk and ended up drinking almost all the alcohol that was in the boat, and said something about fighting swans, which is never a fun thing, and things just got stranger from there. So we are on chapter 15 of the book. So, my dear marvelous scholars, shall we begin our reading? Or shall I babble on a little bit more? I don't mind wit either. A little hydration is needed. Julian 20, reading is awesome. It is indeed. It is indeed. Kintron, feel free to drink the perfectly normal fresh water. Kintron, we talked about this. No river water. So, my dear scholars, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking, and we will start our reading of Three Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. Chapter 15. We woke late the next morning, and at Harris's earnest desire, partook of a plain breakfast, with non-dainties. Then we cleaned up and put everything straight, a continual labor, which was beginning to afford me a pretty clear insight into a question that had often posed me, namely, how a woman with the work of only one house on her hands manages to pass away her time. And at about 10 set out on what we had determined should be a good day's journey. Dino Gain 139. Someone really named their kid Jerome Jerome. Yes, they really named their kid Jerome Jerome. I actually looked it up. It is not a pseudonym. That is actually his name. We agreed that we would pull this morning, as a change from towing, and Harris thought the best arrangement would be that George and I should scull, and he steer. I did not chime in with this idea at all. I said I thought Harris would have been showing a more proper spirit if he had suggested that he and George should work, and let me rest a bit. It seemed to me I was doing more than my fair share of the work on this trip, and I was beginning to feel strongly on the subject. It always does seem to me that I am doing more work than I should do. It is not that I object to the work, mind you. I like work. It fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours. I love to keep it by me. The idea of getting rid of it nearly breaks my heart. You cannot give me too much work. To accumulate work has almost become a passion with me. My study is so full of it now that there is hardly an inch of room for any more. I shall have to throw out a wing soon. And I am careful of my work too. Nico Roscoe. Talking about names, I've never heard anyone butcher my name like you did. Oh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I apologize. Oh, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings. I mean, I do try to get names right, but I do have a tendency to fumble over names with pronunciations and things like that. I try. I really try. And if I made a mistake with your name, I deeply apologize from the bottom of my heart. Um, I hope you're not too offended by it, and I'll try better next time. Mm. I do try my best. It's just, yeah, pronunciations can be a little bit difficult. You would think a reading VTuber might have an easier time doing pronunciations, but I'm pretty bad. All right, you good. It's pretty difficult for non-native speakers. Understood. Understood. I'll try better next time. Where was I? And I am careful of my work too. Why, some of the work that I have by me now has been in my possession for years and years, and there isn't a finger mark on it. I take a great pride in my work. I take it down now and then and dust it. No man keeps his work in a better state of preservation than I do. I don't think one should be so proud of procrastination. But he seems pretty proud of it. I will admit I am a bit of a procrastinator myself now and then. It is a difficult thing not to do. But though I crave for work, I still like to be fair. I do not ask for more than my proper share. But I get it without asking for it, at least so it appears to me, and this worries me. George says he does not think I need trouble myself on the subject. He thinks it is only my over scrupulous nature that makes me fear. I am having that it makes me fear I am having more than my due. And that, as a matter of fact, I don't have half as much as I ought. But I expect he only says this to comfort me. Dino Gain, how I sleep with multiple essays late by several months. Yeah, it can be easy to, forget about certain pieces of work until it's like the day of. And then you're forced to rush through it and do the best job that you possibly can. I don't have half as much as I ought, but I expect he only says this to comfort me. In a boat, I have always noticed that it is the fixed idea of each member of the crew that he is doing everything. Harris's notion was that it was he alone who had been working, and that both George and I had been imposing upon him. George, on the other hand, ridiculed the idea of Harris's having done anything more than eat and sleep, and had a cast iron opinion that it was he, George himself, who had done all the labor worth speaking of. He said he had never been out with such a couple of lazy skulks as Harris and I. This amused Harris. Fancy old George talking about work, he laughed. Why, about half an hour of it would kill him. Have you ever seen George work? He added, turning to me. I agreed with Harris that I never had. Most certainly not since we had started on this trip. Well, I don't see how you can know much about it, one way or the other, George retorted to Harris. For I'm blast if you haven't been to sleep half the time. Have you ever seen Harris fully awake except at meal time? Asked George, addressing me. Truth compelled me to support George. Harris had been very little good in the boat, so far as helping was concerned, from the beginning. Well, hang it all, I've done more than old Jay, anyhow, rejoined Harris. Well, you couldn't very well have done less, added George. I suppose Jay thinks he is the passenger, continued Harris. And that was their gratitude for me for having brought them and their wretched old boat all the way up from Kingston, and for having superintended and managed everything for them, and taken care of them, and slaved for them. It is the way of the world. We settled the present difficulty by arranging that Harris and George should scull up past Reading, and that I should tow the boat on from there. Pulling a heavy boat against a strong stream has few attractions for me now. There was a time long ago when I used to clamor for the hard work. Now I like to give the youngsters a chance. I notice that most of the old river hands are similarly retiring whenever there is any stiff pulling to be done. You can always tell the old river hand by the way in which he stretches himself out upon the cushions at the bottom of the boat, and encourages the rowers by telling them anecdotes about the marvelous feats he performed last season. "Call what you're doing hard work," he drawls between his contented whiffs, addressing the two perspirating novices, who have been grinding away steadily upstream for the last hour and a half. "Why, Jim Biffles and Jack and I, last season, pulled up from Marlow to Goring in one afternoon. Never stopped once. Do you remember that, Jack?" Jack, who has made himself a bed in the prow of all the rugs and coats he can collect, and who has been lying there asleep for the last 2 hours, partially wakes up on being thus appealed to, and recollects all about the matter, and also remembers that there was an unusually strong stream against them all the way. Likewise, a stiff wind. "About 34 miles, I suppose. Must have been," adds the first speaker, reaching down another cushion to put under his head. "No, no, don't exaggerate, Tom," murmurs Jack, reprovingly. 33 at the outside." And Jack and Tom, quite exhausted by this conversational effort, drop off to sleep once more, and the two simple-minded youngsters at the sculls feel quite proud of being allowed to row such wonderful oarsmen as Jack and Tom, and strain away harder than ever. When I was a young man, I used to listen to these tales from my elders, and take them in, and swallow them, and digest every word of them, and then come up for more. But the new generation do not seem to have the simple faith of the old times. We, George, Harris, and myself, took a Rawin up with us once last season, and we plied him with the customary stretchers about the wonderful things we had done all the way up. We gave him all the regular ones, the time-honored lies that have been done duty up the river with every boating man for years past, and added seven entirely original ones that we had invented for ourselves, including a really quite likely story, founded, to a certain extent, on an all but true episode. Oh, thank you, Dino Gain, for the hydrate. Oh, my goodness. I do need a drink, actually. That was perfect timing. Drink streamer. Yes, thank you. On, on an all but true episode, which had actually happened in a modified degree some years ago to friends of ours. A story that a mere child could have believed without injuring itself much. Excuse me. And that young man mocked at them all, and wanted us to repeat the feats then and there, and to bet us 10 to 1 that we didn't. We got to chatting about our rowing experiences this morning, and to recounting stories of our first efforts in the art of oarsmanship. My own earliest boating recollection is of 5 of us contributing 3 pence each and taking out a curiously constructed craft on the Regent's Park Lake, drying ourselves subsequently in the park keeper's lodge. After that, having acquired a taste for the water, I did a good deal of rafting in various suburban brickfields, an exercise providing more interest and excitement than might be imagined, especially when you are in the middle of the pond, and the proprietor of the materials of which the raft is constructed suddenly appears on the bank with a big stick in his hand. Your first sensation on seeing this gentleman is that somehow or other you don't feel equal to company and conversation, and that if you could do so without appearing rude, you would rather avoid meeting him, and your object is therefore to get off on the opposite side of the pond to which he is, and to go home quietly and quickly, pretending not to see him. He, on the contrary, is yearning to take you by the hand and talk to you. It appears he knows your father, and is intimately acquainted with yourself, but this does not draw you towards him. He says he'll teach you to take his boards, and make a raft of them, but seeing that you know how to do this pretty well already, the offer, though doubtless kindly meant, seems a superfluous one on his part, and you are reluctant to put him to any trouble by accepting it. His anxiety to meet you, however, is proof against all your coolness, and the energetic manner in which he dodges up and down the pond so as to be on the spot to greet you when you land is really quite flattering. I think the owner has a different idea in his mind than the narrator does. Curious. If he be of a stout and short-winded build, you can easily avoid his advances. But when he is of the youthful and long-legged type, a meeting is inevitable. The interview is, however, extremely brief, most of the conversation being on his part, your remarks being mostly of an exclamatory and monosyllable order, and as soon as you can tear yourself away, you do so. I devoted some 3 months to rafting, and being then as proficient as there was any need to be at that branch of the art, I determined to go in for rowing proper, and joined one of the Leia boating clubs. Being out in a boat on the River Leia, especially on Saturday afternoons, soon makes you smart at handling a craft, and spry at escaping being run down by roughs or swamped by barges, and it also affords plenty of opportunity for acquiring the most prompt and graceful method of lying down flat at the bottom of the boat, so as to avoid being chucked out into the river by passing tow lines. But it does not give you style. It was not till I came to the Thames that I got style. My style of rowing is very much admired now. People say it is so quaint. George never went near the water until he was 16. Then he and 8 other gentlemen of about the same age went down in a body to Kew one Saturday, with the idea of hiring a boat there, and pulling to Richmond and back. One of their number, a shock-headed youth named Joskins, who had once or twice taken out a boat on the Serpentine, told them it was jolly fun boating. The tide was running out pretty rapidly when they reached the landing stage, and there was a stiff breeze blowing across the river. But this did not trouble them at all, and they proceeded to select their boat. It was there was an 8-oared racing outrigger drawn up on the stage. That was the one that took their fancy. They said they'd have that one, please. The boatman was away, and only his boy was in charge. The boy tried to damp their ardor for the outrigger, and showed them 2 or 3 very comfortable-looking boats of the family party build, but those would not do at all. The outrigger was the boat they thought they would look best in. So the boy launched it, and they took off their coats and prepared to take their seats. The boy suggested that George, who even in those days was always the heavy man of any party, should be number 4. George said he would be happy to be number 4, and promptly stepped into the bow's place, and sat down with his back to the stern. They got him into his proper position at last, and then the others followed. A particularly nervous boy was appointed, and please save your snickering, dear scholars. A particularly nervous boy was appointed Cox. I can tell some of you are snickering back there. And the steering principle explained to him by Joskins. Joskins himself took stroke. He told the others that it was simple enough, and all they had to do was to follow him. FT Waste can't prove it. Dino Gain, don't you snicker, Dino Gain. Don't you snicker. This is a very serious book. And don't you start laughing, Julian20. No laughing. Is there going to be trouble in the study tonight? Oh! Oh, thank you for the follow, Prime6752, and welcome! Welcome to our group of scholars. Glad to have you here. Where was I? They said they were ready, and the boy on the landing stage took a boat hook and shoved them off. What then followed? Oh, hello there, Densuo. Welcome. We are reading 3 Men in a Boat. We are on the first chapter for the evening. What then followed, George is unable to describe in detail. He had a confused recollection of having immediately on starting received a violent blow in the small of the back from the butt head of number 5 skull, at the same time that his own seat seemed to disappear from under him by magic, and leave him sitting on the boards. He also noticed as a curious circumstance that number 2 was at the same instant lying on his back, at the bottom of the boat, with his legs in the air, apparently in a fit. They passed under Kew Bridge, broadside, at the rate of 8 miles an hour, Joskins being the only one who was rowing. George, on recovering his seat, tried to help him, but on dipping his oar into the water, it immediately, to his intense surprise, disappeared under the boat, and nearly took him with it. And the cocks... No. And the cocks threw both rudder lines overboard and burst into tears. How they got back, George never knew, but it took them just 40 minutes. A dense crowd watched the entertainment from Kew Bridge with much interest, and everybody shouted out to them different directions. 3 times they managed to get the boat back through the arch, and 3 times they were carried under it again. And every time Cox looked up and saw the bridge above him, he broke out into renewed sobs. George said he little thought that afternoon that he should ever come to really like boating. Come on. It doesn't mean that. No. Where am I? Oh, there I am. Harris is more accustomed to sea rowing than to river work, and says that as an exercise he prefers it. I don't. I remember taking a small boat out to Eastbourne last summer. I used to do a good deal of sea rowing years ago, and I thought I should be all right, but I found I had forgotten the art entirely. When one scull was deep down underneath the water, the other would be flourishing wildly about in the air. To get a grip of the water with both at the same time, I had to stand up. The parade was crowded with nobility and gentry, and I had to pull past them in this ridiculous fashion. I landed halfway down the beach and secured the services of an old boatman to take me back. I like to watch an old boatman rowing, especially one who has been hired by the hour. There is something so beautifully calm and restful about his method. It is so free from that fretful haste, that vehement striving, that every day becomes more and more the bane of the 19th century life. He is not forever straining himself to pass all the other boats. If another boat overtakes him and passes him, it does not annoy him. As a matter of fact, they all do overtake him and pass him, all those that are going his way. This would trouble and irritate some people. The sublime equanimity of the hired boatman under the ordeal affords us a beautiful lesson against ambition and uppishness. Plain practical rowing of the get the boat along order is not a very difficult art to acquire, but it takes a good deal of practice. Oh, hold on. I skipped a page. But it takes a good deal of practice before a man feels comfortable when rowing past girls. It is the time that worries a youngster. "It's jolly funny," he says, as for the 20th time within 5 minutes he disentangles his sculls from yours. "I can get all right when I'm by myself." To see two novices try to keep time with one another is very amusing. Bo finds it impossible to keep pace with Stroke because Stroke rows in such an extraordinary fashion. Stroke is intensely indignant at this, and explains that what he has been endeavoring to do for the last 10 minutes is to adapt his method to Bo's limited capacity. Bo in turn then becomes insulted, and requests Stroke not to trouble his head about him, Bo, but to devote his mind to gain a sensible stroke. "Oh, shall I take Stroke?" he adds, with the evident idea that would at once put the whole matter right. They splash along for another 100 yards with still moderate success. Then the whole secret of their trouble bursts upon Stroke like a flash of inspiration. "I tell you what it is, you've got my sculls," he cries, turning to Bo. "Pass yours over." Oh, it's Bow, not Bo. Ooh. "Well, do you know, I've been wondering how it was I couldn't get on with these, answers Bow, quite brightening up and most willingly assisting in the exchange. "Now we shall be all right." But they are not. Not even then. Stroke has to stretch his arms nearly out of their sockets to reach his sculls now, while Bow's while Bow's bows while Bow's pair at each recovery hits him a violent blow in the chest. So they change back again, and come to the conclusion that the man has given them the wrong set altogether, and over their mutual abuse of this man they become quite friendly and sympathetic. George said he had often longed to take to punting for a change. Punting is not as easy as it looks. As in rowing, you soon learn how to get along and handle the craft. But it takes long practice before you can do this with dignity, and without getting the water all up your sleeve. One young man I knew had a very sad accident happen to him the first time he went punting. He had been getting on so well that he had grown quite cheeky over the business, and was walking up and down the punt, working his pole with a careless grace that was quite fascinating to watch. Up he would march to the head of the punt, plant his pole, and then run along great to the other end, just like an old punter. Oh, it was grand. And it would have all gone on being grand, if he had not, unfortunately, while looking round to enjoy the scenery, taken just one step more than there was any necessary for, and walked off the punt altogether. The pole was firmly fixed in the mud, and he was left clinging to it while the punt drifted away. It was an undignified position for him. A rude boy on the bank immediately yelled out to a lagging chum to "hurry up and see a real monkey on a stick." I could not go to his assistance, because, as ill luck would have it, we had not taken the proper precaution to bring out a spare pole with us. I could only sit and look at him. His expression as the pole slowly sank with him I shall never forget. There was so much thought in it. Kinshron reminds me of Scarecrow getting stuck on a pole crossing the river. That is true. That is true. It is like that. It is like that. Or was I? Oh, yeah. I watched him gently let down into the water and saw him scramble out sad and wet. I could not help laughing. He looked such a ridiculous figure. I continued to chuckle to myself about it for some time, and then it was suddenly forced upon me that really I had got very little to laugh at when I came to think of it. Here was I alone in a punt without a pole, drifting helplessly down midstream, possibly towards a weir. I began to feel very indignant with my friend for having stepped overboard and gone off in that way. He might, at all events, have left me the pole. I drifted on for about a quarter of a mile, and then I came in sight of a fishing punt moored in midstream, in which sat two old fishermen. They saw me bearing down upon them, and they called out to me to keep out of their way. "I can't," I shouted back. "But you don't try," they answered. I explained the matter to them when I got near, and they caught me and lent me a pole. The weir was just 50 yards below. I am glad that happened to be there. They happened to be there. The first time I went punting was in company with 3 other fellows that were going to show me how to do it. We could not all start together, so I said I would go down first and get out the punt, and then I could potter about and practice a bit until they came. I could not get a punt out that afternoon. They were all engaged, so I had nothing else to do but to sit down on the bank watching the river and waiting for my friends. I had not been sitting there long before my attention became attracted to a man in a punt, who I noticed with some surprise wore a jacket and a cap exactly like mine. He was evidently a novice at punting, and his performance was most interesting. You never knew what was going to happen when he put the pole in. He evidently did not know himself. Sometimes he shot upstream, and sometimes he shot downstream, and at other times he simply spun round and came up the other side of the pole. And with every result he seemed equally surprised and annoyed. The people on the river began to get quite absorbed in him after a while, and to make bets with one another as to what would be the outcome of his next push. Unit 20, would you have any idea how to do it? I certainly would not. Well, punting, it basically is as they describe it. You push the pole in, run up, push the pole in again. You're basically following the pole as you push it. I think that's how it works. Because you're basically planting the pole into the ground. It's not like regular rowing, which has like an oar and all that. What you're doing is you're excuse me again. You're using a long pole and you're planting it into the ground and then using the ground to push it. That's why there's such a danger if the mud is soft, because if it gets stuck in the mud, it can be, of course, very difficult to pull it out in time as the boat is going along. The people about the river began to get quite absorbed in him after a while, and to make bets with one another as to what would be the outcome of his next push. In the course of time, my friends arrived on the opposite bank, and they stopped and watched him too. His back was towards them, and they only saw his jacket and cap. For this they immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was I, their beloved companion, who was making an exhibition of himself, and their delight knew no bounds. They commenced to chaff him unmercilessly. I apologize for my motor mouth. They commenced to chaff him unmercifully. I did not grasp their mistake at first, and I thought, how rude of them to go out like that, with a perfect stranger too. But before I could call out and reprove them, the explanation of the matter occurred to me, and I withdrew behind a tree. Oh, how they enjoyed themselves ridiculing that young man. For 5 good minutes they stood there, shouting ribaldry at him, deriding him, mocking him, jeering at him. They peppered him with stale jokes. They even had made a few new ones and threw them at him. They hurled at him all the private family jokes belonging to our set, which must have been perfectly unintelligible to him. And then, unable to stand their brutal jibes any longer, he turned round on them, and they saw his face. I was glad to notice that they had sufficient decency left in them to look very foolish. They explained to him that they had thought he was someone they knew. They said they hoped he would not deem them capable of so insulting anyone except a personal friend of their own. Of course, their having mistaken him for a friend excused it. I remember Harris telling me once of a bathing experience he had at Burloin. I think that's how it's pronounced. He was swimming about there near the beach when he felt himself suddenly seized by the neck from behind and forcibly plunged under water. He struggled violently, but whoever had got hold of him seemed to be a perfect Hercules in strength, and all his efforts in escape were unavailing. He had given up kicking and was trying to turn his thoughts upon solemn things when his captor released him. He regained his feet and looked round for his would-be murderer. The assassin was standing close by him, laughing heartily, but the moment he caught sight of Harris's face as it emerged from the water, he started back and seemed quite concerned. I really beg your pardon, he stammered confusedly. I took you for a friend of mine. Harris thought it was lucky for him the man had not mistaken him for a relation, or he would probably have been drowned outright. Sailing is a thing that wants knowledge and practice too, though as a boy I did not think so. I had an idea it came natural to a body, like rounders and touch. I knew another boy who held this view likewise, and so one windy day we thought we would try the sport. We had stopped down we were stopping down at Yarmouth, and we decided we would go up for a trip up the Yar. We hired a sailing boat at the yard by the bridge and started off. "It's rather a rough day," said the man to us as we put off. "Better take in a reef and luff, sharp when you get round the bend." We said we'd make a point of it, and left him with a cheery "Good morning," wondering to ourselves how you luffed, and where we were to get a reef from, and what we were to do with it when we had got it. We rowed until we were out of sight of the town, and then, with a wide stretch of water in front of us, and the wind blowing a perfect hurricane across it, we felt that the time had come to commence operations. Hector, I think that was his name, went on pulling while I unrolled the sail. It seemed a complicated job, but I accomplished it at length, and then came the question, which was the top end? By a sort of natural instinct, we of course eventually decided that the bottom was the top, and set to work to fix it upside down. But it was a long time before we could get it up, either that way or any other way. The impression on the mind of the sail seemed to be that we were playing at funerals, and that I was the corpse and itself was the winding sheet. When I found that this was not the idea, it hit me over the head with the boom, and refused to do anything. "Wet it," said Hector. "Drop it over and get it wet." He said people in ships always wetted the sails before they put them up. So I wetted it, but that only made matters worse than they were before. A dry sail clinging to your legs and wrapping itself round your head is not pleasant, but when the sail is sopping wet, it becomes quite vexing. We did get the thing up at last, the two of us together. We fixed it, not exactly upside down, more sideways like, and we tied it up to the mast with the painter, which we cut off for the purpose. That the boat did not upset, I simply state as a fact. Why it did not upset, I am unable to offer any reason. I have often thought about the matter since, but I have never succeeded in arriving at any satisfactory explanation of the phenomenon. Possibly the result may have been brought about by the natural obstinacy of all things in this world. The boat may possibly have come to the conclusion, judging from a cursory view of our behavior, that we had come out for a morning's suicide, and had thereabout determined to disappoint us. That is the only suggestion I can offer. By clinging like grim death to the gunwale, we just managed to keep inside the boat, but it was exhausting work. Hector said that pirates and other seafaring people generally lashed the rudder to something or other, and hauled in the main topjib during severe squalls, and thought we ought to try to do something of the kind. But I was for letting her have her head to the wind. As for As my advice was by far the easiest to follow, we ended by adopting it and contrived to embrace the gunwale and give her her head. The boat traveled upstream for about a mile at a pace I have never sailed at since, and don't want to again. Then at a bend she heeled over till half her sail was under water, and then she righted herself up by a miracle and flew for a long low bank of soft mud. That mud bank saved us. The boat plowed its way into the middle of it and then stuck. Finding that we were once more able to move according to our ideas, instead of being pitched and thrown about like peas in a bladder, we crept forward and cut down the sail. We had had enough of sailing. We did not want to overdo the thing and get a sulfate of it. We had had a sail, a good, all-round, exciting, interesting sail, and we thought we would have a row, just for a change like. We took the sculls and tried to push the boat off the mud, and in doing so, we broke one of the sculls. After that, we proceeded with great caution, but they were a wretched old pair, and the second one cracked almost easier than the first and left us helpless. The mud stretched out for about 100 yards in front of us, and behind us was the water. The only thing to be done was to sit and wait until someone came by. It was not the sort of day to attract people out on the river, and it was 3 hours before a soul came in sight. It was an old fisherman who, with immense difficulty, at last rescued us, and we were towed back in an ignominious fashion to the boatyard. What between tipping the man who had brought us home and paying for the broken sculls and for having been out 4 hours and a half, it cost us a pretty considerable number of weeks' pocket money, that sail. But we learned experience, and they say that it is always cheap at any price. Gonna get a little drink of water before we do the next chapter. You know, these folks have so many troubles just going on the river. I have never actually sailed. Have any of you scholars sailed before? I've never have, so I don't know what the experience is like. But it does sound interesting, if a lot of work, if I was to be honest. I need to really look. FT Wastes. I've sailed once or twice. It's a bit nerve-wracking. At least it was for me. Oh my goodness. I hope you had a better time than Jay and his friend, Dino Gain. I've only had a little row. Yeah, I've rowed before as well. I've done canoeing and kayaking. Did I do a kayak? No, I did a canoe. I did a canoe once. Rather enjoyed it, actually. But I've never ever sailed. FT Ways, huh? Hey, it sounds like I had a better time with it than they did. It does. It does. At least you didn't land in a mud bank. Okay. Chapter 16. We came in sight of Reading about 11. The river is dirty and dismal here. One does not linger in the neighborhood of Reading. The town itself is a famous old place, dating from the dim days of King Ethelred. I'm never good with pronouncing Saxon names. Ethelred was a Saxon king, by the way. I don't know if this is Wessex or which one it was, but he was an Anglo-Saxon king um, during the time when the Danes were invading. For context, whenever the English British use the phrase Danes, they're not necessarily from Denmark. It's just Vikings. Kintron, haven't sailed, did some rowing and rafting, though prefer motorboats. I think most people prefer motorboats. Much easier. The town itself is a famous old place, dating from the dim days of King Ethelred, when the Danes anchored their warships in the Kennet, and started from Reading to ravage all the lands of Wessex. Oh, so it is Wessex. And here Ethelred and his brother Alfred fought and defeated them. Ethelred doing the praying and Alfred the fighting. So they're referencing Alfred the Great then, who was probably one of the most well known of the Saxon kings. There's a reason he's called Alfred the Great, after all. In later years, Reading seemed to have been regarded as a heady place to run down to, when matters were becoming unpleasant in London. Parliament generally rushed off to Reading whenever there was a plague on at Westminster, and in 1625 the law followed suit, and all the courts were held in Reading. It must have been worthwhile having a mere ordinary plague now and then in London to get rid of both the lawyers and the Parliament. Okay, that's good. That's good. That is good. During the parliamentary struggle, Reading was besieged by the Earl of Essex, and a quarter of a century later by the Prince of Orange. A quarter of a century later, the Prince of Orange routed King James' troops there. That was the end of the Glorious Revolution, by the way, when James II was removed from the throne, and the Prince of Orange, as well as his wife, William and Mary, I believe, took the throne of Britain. You're getting a free history lesson here, my dear scholars. I hope you enjoy it. Henry I lies buried at Reading, in the Benedictine abbey founded by him there, the ruins of which may still be seen. And in this same abbey, great John of Gaunt was married to the Lady Blanche. At Reading Lock we came up with a steam launch, belonging to some friends of mine, and they towed us up to within about a mile of Streatley. It is very delightful being towed up by a launch. I prefer it myself to rowing. The run would have been more delightful still, if it had not been for a lot of wretched small boats that were continually getting in the way of our launch, and to avoid running down which we had to be continually easing and stopping. It is really most annoying, the manner in which these rowing boats get in the way of one's launch up the river. Something ought to be done to stop it. And they are so confoundedly impertinent, too, over it. You can whistle till you nearly burst your boilers before they will trouble themselves to hurry. I would have one or two of them run down now and then if I had my way, just to teach them all a lesson. So, let me get this straight. The Jay, who happens to be in a rowboat and being towed by a steam launch, is complaining about how rowboats get in the way of a steam launch. Yes, that's logical, don't you think? The river becomes very lovely from a little above Reading. The railway rather spoils it near Tilehurst, but from Mapledurham up to Streatley it is glorious. A little above Mapledurham Lock you pass Hardwicke House, where Charles I played bowls. The neighbourhood of Pangbourne, where the quaint little Swan Inn stands, must be familiar to the habitués of the art exhibitions as it is to its own inhabitants. I can't pronounce French, I will admit it right here and then. My friend's launch cast us loose just before the grotto, and then Harris wanted to make out that it was my turn to pull. This seemed to me most unreasonable. It had been arranged in the morning that I should bring the boat up to 3 miles above Reading. Well, here we were, 10 miles above Reading. Surely it was now their turn again. I could not get either George or Harris to see the matter in its proper light, however, so to save argument I took the sculls. I had not been pulling for more than a minute or two when George noticed something black floating on the water, and we drew up to it. George leant over as we neared it and laid hold of it, and then he drew back with a cry and a blanched face. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. It was the dead body of a woman. It lay very lightly on the water, and the face was sweet and calm. It was not a beautiful face. It was too prematurely aged looking, too thin and drawn to be that. Oh my goodness. We go from a joke to find a dead body in the river? But it was a gentle, lovable face in spite of its stamp of pinch and poverty. And upon it was that look of restful peace that comes to the faces of the sick sometimes when at last the pain has left them. Oh my goodness. Dino Game genre twist time. Yes, indeed. I was not expecting this. We found out the woman's story afterwards. Of course, it was the old, vulgar tragedy. She had loved and been deceived, or had deceived herself. Anyhow, she had sinned. Some of us do now and then. And her family and friends, naturally shocked and indignant, had closed their doors against her. Oh my goodness. Oh no. If you know what they're referring to, oh no. Dino Gang, LOL, please just turn into a murder mystery. Oh no. Oh, that's really dark. That's dark. Left to fight the world alone with the millstone of her shame around her neck, she had sunk even lower and lower. For a while she had kept both herself and the child on the 12 shillings a week that 12 hours drudgery a day procured her, paying 6 shillings out for it for the child and keeping her own body and soul together on the remainder. Oh my goodness, this is sad. 6 shillings a week does not keep body and soul together very unitedly. They want to get away from each other. They want to get away from each other when there is only such a very slight bond as that between them. And one day, I suppose, the pain and dull monotony of it all had stood before her eyes plainer than usual, and the mocking spectre had frightened her. She had made one last appeal to friends, but against the chill wall of their respectability the voice of the erring outcast fell unheeded. And then she had gone to see her child, and held it in her arms, and kissed it in a weary, dull sort of way, and without betraying any particular emotion of any kind, had left it, after putting into its hand a penny box of chocolate. She had bought it, oh my goodness, and afterwards with her last few shillings had taken a ticket and come down to Goring. It seemed that the bitterest thoughts of her life must have centered about the wooded reaches and the bright green meadows around Goring. But women strangely hug the knife that stabs them, and perhaps amidst the gall there may have mingled also sunny memories of sweetest hours spent upon those shadowed deeps over which the great trees bend their branches down so low. She had wandered about the woods by the river's brink all day, and then when evening fell and the gray twilight spread its dusky robes upon the waters, she stretched her arms out to the silent river that had known her sorrow and her joy, and the old river had taken her into its gentle arms, and had laid her weary head upon its bosom, and had hushed away the pain. Thus she had sinned in all things, sinned in living and in dying, God help her, and all other sinners, if any more there be. Dino Game, bosom. Yes, bosom. Yes, it means exactly what you think it means, Dino Game. Oh my goodness. Goring on the left bank and Streatley on the right are both or either charming places to stay at for a few days, and now we're back to the humorous bit. That is dark, Jerome K. Jerome. That is dark. The reaches down to Painbourne woo one for a sunny sail or for a moonlit row, and the country round about is full of beauty. We had intended to push on to Wallingford that day, but the sweet smiling face of the river had lured us to linger for a while, and so we left our boat at the bridge and went up into Streatley, and lunched at the Bull, much to Montmorency's satisfaction. They say that the hills on each side of the stream here once joined and formed a barrier across what is now the Thames, and that then the river ended there above Goring in one vast lake. I am not in a position either to contradict or affirm this statement. I simply offer it. It is an ancient place, Streatley, dating back like most riverside towns and villages to British and Saxon times. Where am I? Okay. Goring is not nearly so pretty a little spot to stop at as Streatley, if you have your choice, but it is passing fair enough in its way, and is near the railway in case you want to slip off without paying your hotel bill. Oh my goodness. I mean, what? What was that all about? They find a dead body in the river. We get the sorrowful tale of why she died, and then all of a sudden we're talking about how best to run off and avoid your hotel bill. That is legitimately dark. Okay. Chapter 17. We stayed 2 days at Streatley and got our clothes washed. We had tried washing them ourselves in the river under George's superintendence, and it had been a failure. Indeed, it had been more than a failure, because we were worse off after we had washed our clothes than we were before. Dino gained, it do be like that sometimes, though. That is true, that is true. That is the nature of life sometimes, unfortunately. Before we had washed them, they had been very, very dirty, it is true, but they were just wearable. After we had washed them, well, the river between Reading and Henley was much cleaner after we had washed our clothes in it than it was before. All the dirt contained in the river between Reading and Henley we collected during that wash and worked it into our clothes. The washerwoman at Streatley said she felt she owed it to herself to charge us just 3 times the usual price for that wash. She said it had not been like washing, it had been more in the nature of excavating. We paid the bill without a murmur. The neighborhood of Streatley and Goring is a great fishing center. There is some excellent fishing to be had there. The river abounds in pike, roach, dace, gudgeon, and eels. Just here, and you can sit and fish for them all day. Oh my goodness, eels. I love eels. They're so good. Some people do. They never catch them. I never knew anybody I never knew anybody catch anything up the Thames, except minnows and dead cats, but that has nothing to do, of course, with fishing. The local fisherman's guide doesn't say a word about catching anything. All it says is the place is a good station for fishing, and from what I have seen of the district, I am quite prepared to bear out this statement. There is no spot in the world where you can get more fishing or where you can fish for a longer period. Some fishermen come here and fish for a day, and others stop and fish for a month. You can hang on and fish for a year if you want to. It will be all the same. The Angler's Guide to the Thames say that jack and perch are also to be had about here. But there the Angler's Guide is wrong. Jack and perch may be about there. Indeed, I know for a fact that they are. You can see them there in the shoals when you are out for a walk along the banks. They come and stand half out of the water with their mouths open for biscuits. And if you go for a bath, they crowd round and get in your way and irritate you. But they are not to be had by a bit of a worm on the end of a hook, nor anything like it. Not they. I am not a good fisherman myself. I devoted a considerable amount of attention to the subject at one time, and was getting on, as I thought, fairly well. But the old hands told me I should never be any real good at it, and advised me to give it up. They said that I was an extremely neat thrower, and that I seemed to have plenty of gumption for the thing, and quite enough constitutional laziness, but they were sure I should never make anything of a fisherman. I had not got sufficient imagination. They said that as a poet or a shilling shocker or a reporter or anything of that kind I might be satisfactory, but that to gain my position as a Thames angler would require more play of fancy, more power of invention than I appeared to possess. Some people are under the impression that all that is required to make a good fisherman is the ability to tell lies easily and without blushing. But this is a mistake. Mere bald fabrication is useless. The veriest tyro can manage that. It is in the circumstantial detail, the embellishing touches of probability, the general air of scrupulous, almost of pedantic veracity that the experienced angler is seen. So we are actually going there, my dear scholars. We are actually going to the whole fisherman's lie bit. I can't believe it. In a book from 1889, they are mentioning the whole idea that you lie when you go fishing. That is hilarious. Anybody can come in and say, "Oh, I caught 15 dozen perch yesterday evening." Or, "Last Monday I landed a gudgeon weighing 18 pounds and measuring 3 feet from the tip of the tail." Kintron, fish tales are an ancient tradition. That is true, Kintron, that is true. No. There is no art, no skill required for that sort of thing. It shows pluck, but that is all. No. Your accomplished angler would scorn to tell a lie that way. His method is a study in itself. He comes in quietly with his hat on, appropriates the most comfortable chair, lights his pipe, and commences to puff in silence. He lets the youngsters brag away for a while, and then, during a momentary lull, he removes the pipe from his mouth and remarks as he knocks the ashes out against the bars, "Well, I had a haul on Tuesday evening that it's not much good my telling anybody about." "Oh, why's that?" they ask. "Because I don't expect anybody would believe me if I did," replies the old fellow calmly, and without even a tinge of bitterness in his tone, as he refills his pipe and requests the landlord to bring him three of Scotch, cold. There is a pause after this, nobody feeling sufficiently sure of himself to contradict the old gentleman. So he has to go on by himself without any encouragement. "No," he continues thoughtfully, "I shouldn't believe it myself if anybody told it to me. But it's a fact, for all that. I had been sitting there all the afternoon, and had caught literally nothing, except a few dozen dice and a score of jack, and I was just about giving it up as a bad job, when I suddenly felt a rather smart pull at the line. I thought it was another little one, and I went to jerk it up. Hang... Oh, getting the pages thing. Pages stick on this book. Of course, we need to work on something with these pages. It's really hard with my fingers. Hang me if I could move the rod. It took me half an hour, sir, to land that fish, and every moment I thought the line was going to snap. I reached him at last, and what do you think it was? A sturgeon. A 40-pound sturgeon. Taken on a line, sir. Yes, you may well look surprised. I'll have another 3 of Scotch, landlord, please." And then he goes on to tell of the astonishment of everybody who saw it, and what his wife said when he got home, and of what Joe Buggles thought about it. I asked the landlord of an inn up the river once if it did not injure him sometimes listening to the tales that the fishermen about there told him, and he said, "Oh no, not now, sir. It did used to knock me over a bit at first, but Lord love you, me and the missus, we listen to 'em all day now. It's what you're used to, you know. It's what you're used to." I knew a young man once. He was a most conscientious fellow, and when he took to fly fishing, he determined never to exaggerate his hauls by more than 25%. "When I have caught 40 fish," said he, "then I will tell people that I have caught 50, and so on. But I will not lie any more than that, because it is sinful to lie." But the 25% plan did not work well at all. He never was able to use it. The greatest number of fish he ever caught in one day was 3, and you can't add 25% to 3, at least not in fish. So he increased his percentage to 33 and a third, but again was awkward when he had only caught 1 or 2. So to simplify matters, he made up his mind to just double the quantity. He stuck to this arrangement for a couple of months, and then he grew dissatisfied with it. Nobody believed him when he told them that he only doubled, and he therefore gained no credit that way whatever, while his moderation put him at a disadvantage among the other anglers. When he had really caught 3 small fish and said he had caught 6, it used to make him quite jealous to hear a man, whom he knew for a fact had only caught 1, going about telling people he had landed 2 dozen. So eventually he made one final arrangement with himself, which he had religiously held to ever since, and that was to count each fish that he caught as 10, and to assume 10 to begin with. For example, if he did not catch any fish at all, then he said he had caught 10 fish. You could never catch less than 10 fish by his system. That was the foundation of it. Then, if by any chance he really did catch 1 fish, he called it 20, while 2 fish would count as 30, 3, 40, and so on. Excuse me. It is a simple and easily worked plan. There have been some talk lately of its being used by the and there has been some talk lately of its being made use of by the angling fraternity in general. Indeed, the committee of the Thames Anglers Association did recommend its adoption about 2 years ago, but some of the older members opposed it. They said they would consider the idea if the number was doubled and each fish counted as 20. Now I can tell you, my dear scholars, I would never lie about any amount of fish I caught if I did fish. Isn't that right, Horace? What do you mean? I'd never lie like that. Of course not. That one time. Well, no, I don't fish, but look, we'll talk about this after the stream. I'm talking to my scholars right now. If ever you have an evening to spare up the river, I should advise you to drop into one of the little village inns and take a seat in the tap room. You will be nearly sure to meet 1 or 2 old rodmen, sipping their toddy there, and they will tell you enough fishy stories in half an hour to give you indigestion for a month. George and I don't know what had become of Harris. He had gone out and had a shave early in the afternoon and had then come back and spent a full 40 minutes in pipe claying his shoes. We had not seen him since. George and I, therefore, and the dog, left to ourselves, went for a walk to Wallingford on the second evening, and coming home, we called in at a little riverside inn for a rest and other things. We went into the parlor and sat down. There was an old fellow there smoking a long clay pipe, and we naturally began chatting. He told us that it had been a fine day today, and we told him that it had been a fine day yesterday, and then we all told each other that we thought it would be a fine day tomorrow, and George said that the crops seemed to be coming up nicely. After that it came out, somehow or other, that we were strangers in the neighborhood, and that we were going away the next morning. Then a pause ensued in the conversation, during which our eyes wandered round the room. They finally rested upon a dusty old glass case fixed very high above the chimney-piece, and containing a trout. It rather fascinated me, that trout. It was such a monstrous fish. In fact, at first glance I thought it was a cod. "Ah!" said the old gentleman, following the direction of my gaze. "Fine fellow, that, ain't he?" "Quite uncommon," I murmured, and George asked the old man how much he thought it weighed. 18 pounds 6 ounces, said our friend, rising and taking down his coat. Yes, he continued, it were 16 years ago, come the third o' next month, that I landed him. I caught him just below the bridge with a minnow. They told me he were in the river, and I said I'd have him, and so I did. You don't see many fish that size about here now. I'm thinking. Good night, gentlemen, good night. And out he went and left us alone. We could not take our eyes off the fish after that. It really was a remarkably fine fish. We were still looking at it when the local carrier, who had just stopped at the inn, came to the door of the room with a pot of beer in his hand, and he also looked at the fish. Dino gained 18 more billion pounds. Yes, apparently, yes. Good sized. I have to get George's voice again. Good sized trout there, said George, turning round him. Ah, you may well say that, sir, replied the man. Then, after a pull at his beer, he added, maybe you weren't here, sir, when the fish was caught. No, we told him. We were strangers in the neighborhood. Ah, said the carrier. Then of course how should you? It was nearly 5 years ago that I caught that trout. Oh, was it you who caught it then? Said I. Yes, sir, said the genial old fellow. I caught him just below the lock. Leastways, what was the lock then? One Friday afternoon. And the remarkable thing about it is that I caught him with a fly. I'd gone out pike fishing. Where was I? Oh, yeah. I'd gone out pike fishing, bless you, never thinking of a trout. And when I saw that whopper on the end of my line, blessed if it didn't quite take me aback. Well, you see, he weighed 26 pound. Good night, gentlemen. Good night. 5 minutes afterwards, a third man came in and described how he had caught it early one morning with bleak. And then he left, and a stolid, solemn-looking, middle-aged individual came in and sat down over by the window. None of us spoke for a while, but at length George turned to the newcomer and said, I beg your pardon. I hope you will forgive the George's voice is hard to get back into. I beg your pardon. I hope you will forgive the liberty that we, perfect strangers in the neighborhood, are taking. But my friend here and myself would be so much obliged if you would tell us how you caught the trout up there. Why, who told you I caught that trout? Was the surprised query. We said that nobody had told us so. But somehow or other we felt instinctively that it was he who had done it. Well, it's a most remarkable tale. It's a most remarkable thing, most remarkable, answered the stolid stranger, laughing, because as a matter of fact you are quite right. I did catch it. But fancy you guessing it like that, dear me. It's really a most remarkable thing. And then he went on and told us how it had taken him half an hour to land it, and how it had broken his rod. He said he had weighed it carefully when he reached home, and had turned the scale at 34 pounds. He went in his turn, and when he was gone, the landlord came in to us. We told him the various histories we had heard about his trout, and he was immensely amused, and we all laughed very heartily. Fancy Jim Bates and Joe Muggles and Mr. Joan and old Billy Mauders all telling you that they had caught it. Well, that is good, said the honest old fellow, laughing heartily. Yes, they are the sort to give it me. They are the sort to give it me, to put up in my parlour. If they had caught it, they are. And then he told us the real history of the fish. It seemed that he had caught it himself years ago, when he was quite a lad, not by any art or skill, but by the unaccountable luck that appears to always wait upon a boy when he plays the wag from school and goes out fishing on a sunny afternoon, with a bit of string tied on to the end of a tree. He said that bringing home that trout had saved him from a whacking, and that even his schoolmaster had said it was worth the rule of 3 and practice put together. He was called out of the room at this point, and George and I turned our gaze upon the fish. It really was a most astonishing trout. The more we looked at it, the more we marveled at it. It excited George so much that he climbed up on the back of a chair to get a better look, to get a better view of it. And then the chair slipped, and George clutched wildly at the trout case to save himself, and down it came with a crash, George and the chair on top of it. "You haven't injured the fish, have you?" I cried in alarm, rushing up. "I hope not," said George, rising cautiously and looking about. But he had. That trout lay shattered into 1,000 fragments. I say 1,000, but they may have been only 900. I did not count them. We thought it strange and unaccountable that a stuffed trout should break into little pieces like that. And so it would have been strange and unaccountable if it had been a stuffed trout. But it was not. That trout was plaster of Paris. Julian 20, poor George, poor trout. Well, it seems no one was telling the truth on that matter. Oh, if you ever decide fishing in the study, we do have lakes in the study. We do have bodies of water. I do suggest being careful though, because we do have some very large specimens in the area, and they can be quite aggressive. And I don't want to have any of my scholars suddenly vanishing out of nowhere after they've tried to go fishing. Sorry. Chapter 18. We left Streatley early the next morning and pulled up to Culham, and slept under the canvas in the backwater there. The river is not extraordinarily interesting between Streatley and Wallingford. From Cleve you get a stretch of 6.5 miles without a lock. I believe this is the longest uninterrupted stretch anywhere above Tennington, and the Oxford Club makes use of it for their trial eights. What he's referring to, of course, is the very famous rowing races of Oxford versus Cambridge. They're still done today. Dino Gain. Fish are cool. Yes, I suppose they are. To some extent. They're very tasty, too. Well, most fish are. But however satisfactory this absence of locks may be to rowing men, it is to be regretted by the mere pleasure seeker. For myself, I am fond of locks. They pleasantly break the monotony of the pull. I like sitting in the boat and slowly rising out of the cool depths up into new reaches and fresh views, or sinking down, as it were, out of the world, and then waiting while the gloomy gates creak and the narrow strip of daylight between them widens till the fair smiling river lies full before you, and you push your little boat out from its brief prison onto the welcoming waters once again. They are picturesque little spots, these locks. The stout old lock-keeper or his cheerful-looking wife or bright-eyed daughter are pleasant folk to have passing chat with. There's a little asterisk here, and it says on the bottom, or rather were. The conservancy, the conservats, nah, the Conservancy of late seems to have constituted itself into a society for the employment of idiots. A good many of the new lock keepers, especially in the more crowded portions of the river, are excitable, nervous old men, quite unfitted for their post. Wow, that is quite a dig. You meet other boats there, and river gossip is exchanged. The Thames would not be the fairyland it is without its flower-decked locks. Talking of locks reminds me of an accident George and I very nearly had one summer's morning at Hampton Court. It was a glorious day, and the lock was crowded, and as is a common practice up the river, a speculative photographer was taking a picture of us all as we lay upon the rising waters. I did not catch what was going on at first, and was therefore extremely surprised at noticing George hurriedly smooth out his trousers, ruffle his hair, and stick his cap on in a rankish manner at the back of his head, and then, assuming an expression of mingled affability and sadness, sit down in a graceful attitude and try to hide his feet. My first idea was that he had suddenly caught sight of some girl he knew, and I looked about to see who it was. Everybody in the lock seemed to have been suddenly struck wooden. They were all standing or sitting about in the most quaint and curious attitudes I have ever seen off a Japanese fan. All the girls were smiling, oh, they did look so sweet, and all the fellows were frowning and looking stern and noble. And then at last the truth flashed across me, and I wondered if I should be in time. Ours was the first boat, and it would be unkind for me to spoil the man's picture, I thought. So I faced round quickly and took up a position in the prow, where I leant with careless grace upon the hitcher, in an attitude suggestive of agility and strength. I arranged my hair with a curl over the forehead, and threw an air of tender wistfulness into my expression, mingled with a touch of cynicism, which I am told suits me. As we stood waiting for the eventful moment, I heard someone behind call out, "Hi! Look at your nose!" I could not turn round to see what was the matter, and whose nose it was that was to be looked at. I stole a sideways glance at George's nose. It was all right, at all events. There was nothing wrong with it that could be altered. I squinted down at my own, and that seemed at all that could be expected also. "Look at your nose, you stupid ass!" came the same voice again, louder. And then another voice cried, "Push your nose out, can't you? You too with the dog!" Neither George nor I dared to turn round. The man's hand was on the cap, and the picture might be taken any moment. Was it us they were calling to? What was the matter with our noses? Why were they to be pushed out? And now the whole lock started yelling, and a stentorian voice from the back shouted, "Look at your boat, sir! You in the red and black caps! It's your two corpses that will get taken in that photo if you ain't quick." We looked then and saw that the nose of our boat had got fixed under the woodwork of the lock, while the incoming water was rising around it and tilting it up. In another moment we should be over. Quick as thought, we each seized an oar, and a vigorous blow against the side of the lock with the butt ends released the boat and sent us sprawling on our backs. We did not come out well in that photograph, George and I. Of course, as was to be expected, our luck ordained it that the man should set his wretched machine in motion at the precise moment that we were both lying on our backs with a wild expression of "Where am I? And what is it?" on our faces, and our feet waving madly in the air. Our feet were undoubtedly the leading article in that photograph. Indeed, very little else was to be seen. They filled up the foreground entirely. Behind them you caught glimpses of the other boats and bits of the surrounding scenery. But everything and everybody else in the lock looked so utterly insignificant and paltry compared with our feet, that all the other people felt quite ashamed of themselves and refused to subscribe to the picture. The owner of one steam launch, who had bespoke 6 copies, rescinded the order on seeing the negative. He said he would take them if anybody could show him his launch, but nobody could. It was somewhere behind George's right foot. There was a good deal of unpleasantness over the business. The photographer thought we ought to take a dozen copies each, seeing that the photo was about 9/10 us, but we declined. We said we had no objection to being photoed full length, but we preferred being taken the right way up. Wallingford, 6 miles above Strentley, is a very ancient town, and has been an active centre for the making of English history. It was a rude, mud-built town in the time of the Britons, who squatted there until the Roman legions evicted them, and replaced their clay-baked walls by mighty fortifications, the trace of which time has not yet succeeded in sweeping away. So well those old world masons knew how to build. But time, though he halted at Roman walls, soon crumbled Romans to dust, and on the ground in later years fought savage Saxons and huge Danes until the Normans came. It was a walled and fortified town up to the time of the Parliamentary War, when it suffered a long and bitter siege from Fairfax. It fell at last, and then the walls were razed. From Wallingford up to Dorchester, the neighborhood of the river grows more hilly and varied and picturesque. Dorchester stands half a mile from the river. Is it No, it's Dorchester. Yeah. It can be reached by paddling up the Thames if you have a small boat, but the best way is to leave the river at Day's Lock and take a walk across the fields. Dorchester is a delightfully peaceful old place, nestling in stillness and silence and drowsiness. Dorchester, like Wallingford, time. Was a city in ancient British times. It was then called Caerdorum, the city on the water. In more recent times, the Romans formed a great camp here, the fortifications surrounding which now seems like low, even hills. In Saxon days, it was the capital of Wessex. It is very old, and it was very strong and great once. Now it sits aside from the stirring world, and nods and dreams. Round Clifton Hampton, itself a wonderfully pretty village, old-fashioned, peaceful, and dainty with flowers. The river scenery is rich and beautiful. So here's the thing, as I mentioned before, dear scholars, originally this book was a straight-up travelogue. So this part really is the original intention of the book, a travelogue telling you all about the sights you would see if you went down the Thames, if you went by the river boats. But they're so minor, so it gets back to the comedy pretty quickly often. Where am I? If you stay the night at Clifton, you cannot do better than put up at the Barley Mow. It is, without exception, I should say, the quaintest, most old-world inn up the river. It stands on the right of the bridge, quite away from the village. Its low-pitched gables and thatched roof and latticed windows give it quite the storybook appearance, while inside it is even still more once upon a timeified. Once upon a timeified. I've never heard a phrase like that before. Once upon a timeified. It would not be a good place for the heroine of a modern novel to stay at. The heroine of a modern novel is always divinely tall, and she is ever drawing herself up to her full height. At the Barley Mow, she would bump her head against the ceiling each time she did this. It would also be a bad house for a drunken man to put up at. There are too many surprises in the way of unexpected steps down into this room and up into that, and as for getting upstairs to his bedroom, or ever finding his bed when he got up, either operation would be an utter impossibility to him. We were up early the next morning, as we wanted to be in Oxford by the afternoon. It is surprising how early one can get up when camping out. One does not yearn for just another 5 minutes nearly so much, lying wrapped up in a rug on the boards of a boat with a Gladstone bag for a pillow, as one does in a feather bed. Wait, again, I'm marveling at this. They actually make a reference to another 5 minutes. You only think that's something that you would find in modern media. You know, the idea of just another 5 minutes sort of thing. But here it is, in 1889, being used as a reference. That is neat. We had finished breakfast and were through Clifton Lock by 8:30. From Clifton to Culham, The riverbanks are flat, monotonous, and uninteresting. But after you get through Culham Lock, the coldest and deepest lock on the river, the landscape improves. At Abingdon, the river passes by the streets. Abingdon is a typical country town of the smaller order. Quiet, evidently respectful, clean, and desperately dull. It prides itself on being old, but whether it can compare in this respect with Wallingford and Dorchester seems doubtful. A famous abbey stood here once, and within what is left of its sanctified walls they brew a bitter ale nowadays. In St. Nicholas Church at Abingdon there is a monument to John Blackwell and his wife Jane, who both, after leading a happily married life, died on the very same day, August 21st, 1625. And in St. Helen's Church it is recorded that W. Lee, who died in 1657, had in his lifetime issue from his loins 200 lacking but 3. If you work this out, you will find that Mr. W. Lee's family numbered 197. Mr. W. Lee, 5 times mayor of Abingdon, was no doubt a benefactor to his generation, but I hope there are not many of his kind about in this overcrowded 19th century. Wow, that Mr. Lee must have been really active. From Abingdon to Nunheim Courtenay is a lovely stretch. Nunheim Park is well worth a visit. It can be viewed on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The house contains a fine collection of pictures and curiosities, and the grounds are very beautiful. The pool under Sandford Lasher just behind the lock is a very good place to drown yourself in. What? 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 The undercurrent is terribly strong, and if you once get down into it, you are all right. An obelisk marks the spot where 2 men have already been drowned while bathing there, and the steps of the obelisk are generally used as a diving board by young men now who wish to see if the place really is dangerous. Iffley Lock and Mill, a mile before you reach Oxford, is a favorite subject with the river-loving brethren of the brush. The real article, however, is rather disappointing after the pictures. Few things I have noticed come quite up to the pictures of them in this world. Yuling 20, oh my indeed, I mean really. We passed through Iffley Lock at about 12:30, and then having tillied up the boat and made all ready for landing, we set to work on our last mile. Between Iffley and Oxford is the most difficult bit of the river, I know. You want to be born on that bit of water to understand it. I have been over it a fairish number of times, but I have never been able to get the hang of it. The man who could row a straight course from Oxford to Iffley ought to be able to live comfortably under one roof with his wife, his mother-in-law, his eldest sister, and the old servant who was in the family when he was a baby. First the current drives you on to the right bank, and then on to the left. Then it takes you out into the middle, turns you round 3 times, and carries you upstream again, and always ends by trying to smash you up against a college barge. Of course, as a consequence of this, we got in the way of a good many other boats during the mile, and then in ours, and of course, as a consequence of that, a good deal of bad language occurred. I don't know why it should be, but everybody is always so exceptionally irritable on the river. Little mishaps that you would hardly notice on dry land drive you nearly frantic with rage when they occur on the water. When Harris or George makes an ass of himself on dry land, I smile indulgently. When they behave in a chucklehead way on the river, I use the most blood-curdling language to them. When another boat gets in my way, I feel I want to take an oar and kill all the people in it. Wow, Jay is very violent. Although that's not surprising given how they acted early on in the book. The mildest tempered people when on land become violent and bloodthirsty when in a boat. I did a little boating once with a young lady. She was naturally of the sweetest and gentlest disposition imaginable, but on the river it was quite awful to hear her. "Oh, drat that man!" she would exclaim when some unfortunate sculler would get in her way. Why don't he look where he's going?" And "Oh, bother the silly old thing!" she would say indignantly when the sail would not go up properly, and she would catch hold of it and shake it quite brutally. Yet, as I have said, when on shore she was kind-hearted and amiable enough. The air of the river has a demoralizing effect upon one's temper, and this it is, I suppose, which causes even bargemen to be sometimes rude to one another, and to use language which, no doubt, in their calmer moments, they regret. So, as you notice, my dear scholars, this stream is going a little later than normal, but we are going to finish this book tonight, I promise. And I thought it might be a good idea to go later just so we could finish it. Oh my goodness. We are on the last chapter, my dear scholars. The last chapter of this fine story. I'm excited to see how it ends. Chapter 19. We spent 2 very pleasant days at Oxford. There are plenty of dogs in the town of Oxford. Montmorency had 11 fights on the first day and 14 on the second, and evidently thought he had gone to heaven. Among folk too constitutionally weak or too constitutionally lazy, whichever it may be, to relish upstream work, it is a common practice to get a boat at Oxford and row down. For the energetic, however, the upstream journey is certainly to be preferred. It does not seem good to be always going with the current. There is more satisfaction in squaring one's back and fighting against it and winning one's way forward in spite of it. At least, so I feel, when Harris and George are sculling and I am steering. To those who do contemplate taking Oxford their starting place, I would say, take your own boat. Unless, of course, you can take someone else's without any possible danger of being found out. Dinogate, it has been true. It has truly been 3 men in a boat. It has. It has. The boats that, as a rule, are let for hire on the Thames above Marlow are very good boats. They are fairly watertight, and so long as they are handled with care, they rarely come to pieces or sink. There are places in them to sit down on, and they are complete with all the necessary arrangements, or nearly all, to enable you to row them and steer them. But they are not ornamental. The boat you hire up the river above Marlow is not the sort of boat in which you can flash about and give yourself airs. The hired up river boat very soon puts a stop to any nonsense of that sort on the part of its occupants. That is its chief, one may say, its only recommendation. The man in the hired up river boat is modest and retiring. He likes to keep on the shady side underneath the trees, and to do most of his traveling early in the morning, or late at night, when there are not many people about on the river to look at him. When the man in the hired up river boat sees anyone he knows, he gets out on the bank and hides behind a tree. I was one of a party who hired an upriver boat one summer for a few days' trip. We had none of us ever seen the hired upriver boat before, and we did not know what it was when we did see it. We had written for a boat, a double sculling skiff, and when we went down with our bags to the yard and gave our names, the man said, "Oh yes, you're the party that wrote for a double sculling shift. It's all right, Jim, fetch round the Pride of the Thames." The boy went, and reappeared 5 minutes afterwards, struggling with an antediluvian chunk of wood, that looked as though it had been recently dug out of somewhere and dug out carelessly so as to have been unnecessarily damaged in the process. My own idea, on first catching sight of the object, was that it was a Roman relic of some sort. A relic of what, I do not know. Possibly a coffin. The neighborhood of the Upper Thames is rich in Roman relics, and my surmise seemed to me a very probable one. But our serious young man, who is a bit of a geologist, pooh-poohed my Roman relic theory and said it was clear to the meanest intellect, in which category he seemed to be grieved that he could not conscientiously include mine, that the thing the boy had found was the fossil of a whale, and he pointed out to us various evidences proving that it must have belonged to the pre-glacial period. To settle the dispute, we appealed to the boy. We told him not to be afraid, but to speak the plain truth. Was it the fossil of a pre-adamant whale, or was it an early Roman coffin? The boy said it was the pride of the Thames. We thought this a very humorous answer on the part of the boy at first, and somebody gave him 2 pence as a reward for his ready wit. But when he persisted in keeping up the joke, as we thought, too long, we got vexed with him. "Come, come, my lad," said our captain sharply. "Don't let us have any nonsense. You take your mother's washing tub home again, and bring us our boat." The boat builder himself came up then and assured us, on his word, as a practical man, that the thing really was a boat. Was, in fact, the boat. The double-sculling skiff selected to take us on our trip down the river. We grumbled a good deal. We thought he might at least have had it whitewashed or tarred, had something done to it to distinguish it from a bit of a wreck, but he could not see any fault in it. He even seemed offended at our remarks. He said he had picked us out the best boat in all his stock, and he thought we might be more grateful. He said it, the pride of the Thames, had been in use just as it is now stood, or rather as it now hung together, for the last 40 years, to his knowledge, and nobody had complained of it before, and he did not see why we should be the first to begin. We argued no more. We fastened the so-called boat together with some pieces of string, got a bit of wallpaper and pasted over the shabbier places, said our prayers, and stepped on board. They charged us 35 shillings for the loan of the remnant for 6 days, and we could have bought the thing out and out for 4 and 6 pence at any sale of driftwood round the coast. The weather changed on the third day. I am talking about our present trip now. And we started from Oxford upon our homeward journey in the midst of a steady drizzle. The river, with the sunlight flashing from its dancing wavelets, glided gilding gold the gray-green beech trunks, glinting through the dark, cool wood paths, chasing shadows o'er the shallows, flinging diamonds from the mill wheels, throwing kisses to the lilies, wanting with the Weir's white waters, silvering moss-grown walls and bridges, brightening every tiny townlet, making sweet every lane and meadow, lying tangled in the rushes, peeping, laughing from each inlet, gleaming gay on many a far sail, making soft the air with glory, is a golden fairy stream. But the river, chill and weary, with the ceaseless raindrops falling on its brown and sluggish waters, with the sound as of a woman weeping low in some dark chamber, while the woods, all dark and silent, shrouded in their mists and vapor, stand like ghosts upon the margin, and silent ghosts with eyes reproachful, like the ghosts of evil actions, like the ghosts of friends neglected, in a spirit-haunted water, through the land of vain regrets. Sunlight is the lifeblood of nature. Mother Earth looks at us with such dull, soulless eyes when the sunlight has died away from out of her. It makes us sad to be with her then. She does not seem to know us or to care for us. She is a widow who has lost the husband she loved, and her children touch her hand and look up into her eyes, but gain no smile from her. We rode on all that day through the rain, and very melancholy work it was. We were we we pretended at first that we enjoyed it. We said it was a change, and that we'd like to see the river under all its different aspects. We said we could not expect to have it all sunshine, nor should we wish it. We told each other that nature was beautiful even in her tears. Indeed, Harris and I were quite enthusiastic about the business for the first few hours. And we sang a song about a gypsy's life, and how delightful a gypsy's existence was, free to storm and sunshine and to every wind that blew, and how he enjoyed the rain, and what a lot of good it did him, and how he laughed at people who didn't like it. George took the fun more soberly, and stuck to the umbrella. We hoisted the cover before we had lunch, and kept it up all the afternoon, just leaving a little space in the bow from which one of us could paddle and keep a lookout. In this way we made 9 miles and pulled up for the night a little below Day's Lock. I cannot honestly say we had a merry evening. The rain poured down with quiet persistency. Everything in the boat was damp and clammy. Supper was not a success. Cold veal pie, when you don't feel hungry, is apt to cloy. I felt it wanted white bait and a cutlet. Harris babbled of soles and white sauce, and passed the remains of his pie to Montmorency, who declined it, and apparently insulted by the offer, went and sat over at the other end of the boat by himself. George requested that we should not talk about these things, at all events, until he had finished his cold boiled beef without mustard. Oh my goodness, this is depressing. Excuse me. We played penny nap after summer. We played penny nap after supper. We played for about an hour and a half, by the end of which time George had won fourpence. George always is lucky at cards. And Harris and I had lost exactly 2 pence each. We thought we would give up gambling then. Oh, hello there, Jewelry Jelly. Thank you for the raid. We are on the final chapter of 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. Hi. Let me give you a shout out. What were you doing, Jewelry Jelly? Oh, my hands are a little shaky. There we go. Shout out to Jewelry Jelly, a wonderful streamer. Not a VTuber, but she does wonderful games. Dave the Diver. Ooh, Dave the Diver sounds like a lot of fun. I've heard of that game, and I've heard it's a lot of fun as well. Glad to have you here, Jewelry Jelly. It's kind of ironic, actually, you playing a game that involves swimming, me reading a book that involves river, boating-ish, I guess. Alright. We thought we would give up gambling then. As Harris said, it breeds an unhealthy excitement when carried too far. George offered to go on and give us our revenge, but Harris and I decided not to battle any further against fate. After that, we mixed ourselves some toddy, and sat round and talked. George told us about a man he had known, who had come up the river 2 years ago, and who had slept out in a damp boat on just such another night as that was, and it had given him rheumatic fever, and nothing was able to save him, and he had died in great agony 10 days afterwards. George said he was quite a young man and was engaged to be married. He said it was one of the saddest things he had ever known. And that put Harris in mind of a friend of his, who had been in the volunteers and who had slept out under canvas one wet night down in Aldershot. On just such another night as this, said Harris, and he had woken up in the morning a cripple for life. Harris said he would introduce us both to the man when we got back to town. It would make our hearts bleed to see him. Wow, such a cheerful bunch. This naturally led to some pleasant chat about what's the word? This naturally led us. This naturally led to some pleasant chat about skati. I can't pronounce scatia, fevers, chills, lung diseases, and bronchitis. And Harris said how very awkward it would be if was one of us were taken seriously ill in the night, seeing how far away we were from a doctor. There seemed to be a desire for something frolicsome to follow up this conversation, and in a weak moment I suggested that George should get out his banjo and see if he could not give us a comic song. I will say for George that he did not want any pressing. There was no nonsense about having left his music at home or anything of that sort. He at once fished out his instrument and commenced to play Two Lovely Black Eyes. I had always regarded Two Lovely Black Eyes as rather a commonplace tune until that evening. The rich vein of sadness that George extracted from it quite surprised me. The desire that grew upon Harris and myself as the mournful strains progressed was to fall upon each other's necks and weep. But by great effort we kept back the rising tears and listened to the wild, yearnful melody in silence. When the chorus came, we even made a desperate effort to be merry. We refilled our glasses and joined in. Harris, in a voice trembling with emotion, leading, and George and I followed a few words behind. And, my dear scholars, I will sing it. I don't know the tune, so I'm just going to sing it. F2 Ace. Whoa, didn't see the raid. Welcome, Raiders. Yes, we got raided. Two lovely black eyes, oh what a surprise, only for telling a man he was wrong. Two. Then we broke down. The unutterable pathos of George's accompaniment to that too we were, in our leaden state of depression, unable to bear. Harris sobbed like a little child, and the dog howled till I thought his heart or his jaw must surely break. George wanted to go on with another verse. He thought that when he had got a little more into the tune, it could throw more abandon, as it were, into the rendering. It might not seem so sad. The feeling of the majority, however, was opposed to the experiment. Million 20, lovely voice. Aw, thank you. I do try. I'm not that great a singer, so I do appreciate, being told that. I'm not that good a singer, honestly. There being nothing else to do, we went to bed. That is, we undressed ourselves and tossed about at the bottom of the boat for some 3 or 4 hours, after which we managed to get some fitful slumber until 5 a.m., when we all got up and had breakfast. The second day was exactly like the first. The rain continued to pour down, and we sat, wrapped up in our mackintoshes, underneath the canvas, and drifted slowly down. One of us, I forget which one now, but I rather think it was myself, made a few feeble attempts during the course of the morning to work up the old gypsy foolishness about being children of nature and enjoying the wet, but it did not go down well at all. That "I care not for the rain, not I," was so painfully evident, as expressing the sentiments of each of us, that to sing it seemed unnecessary. On one point we were all agreed, and that was that come what might, we would go through with this job to the bitter end. We had come out for a fortnight's enjoyment on the river, and a fortnight's enjoyment on the river we meant to have. If it killed us, well, that would be a sad thing for our friends and relations, but it could not be helped. We felt that to give in to the weather in a climate such as ours would be a most disastrous precedent. "It's only 2 days more," said Harris, "and we are young and strong. We may get over it all right, after all." At about 4 o'clock we began to discuss our arrangements for the evening. We were a little past Goring then, and we decided to paddle on to Pangbourne and pull up there for the night. "Another jolly evening! Another jolly evening!" murmured George. We sat amused. We sat amused on the prospect. We should be in at Painbourne. Ah, we should be in at Painbourne by 5. We should finish our dinner at, say, 6:30. After that we could walk about the village in the pouring rain until bedtime. Or we could sit in a dimly lit bar parlor and read the almanac. I don't know, I wouldn't mind just sitting there reading the almanac, honestly. "Why, the Alhambra would be almost more lively," said Harris. And little asterisks here. No, oh, that's not yet. Not yet. That's another number. Would be almost more lively," said Harris, venturing his head outside the cover for a moment and taking a survey of the sky. "With a little supper at the asterisk there to follow." And the asterisk says, "A capital little out of the way restaurant in the neighborhood of blank, where you can get one of the best cooked and cheapest little French dinners or suppers that I know of, with an excellent bottle of Boe Boen, I can't pronounce it, for 3 and 6, and which I am not going to be an idiot enough to advertise." I added half unconsciously, "Yes, it's always a pity we've made up our minds to stick to this boat," answered Harris. And then there was silence for a while. No, that's Harris, not George. I'm mixing up the voices. "Yes, it's always a pity we've made up our minds to stick to this boat," answered Harris. And then there was silence for a while. "If we hadn't made up our minds to contract our certain deaths in this bally old coffin," observed George, casting a glance of intense malevolence over the boat, "it might be worth while to mention that there's a train leaves Pangbourne, I know, soon after 5, which would just land us in town in comfortable time to get a chop, and then could go on to the place you mentioned afterwards." Nobody spoke. We looked at one another, and each one seemed to see his own mean and guilty thoughts reflected in the face of the others. In silence, where am I? In silence, we dragged out and overhauled the Gladstone. We looked up the river and down the river. Not a soul was in sight. 20 minutes later, 3 figures, followed by a shamed-looking dog, might have been seen creeping stealthily from the boathouse at the Swan towards the railway station, dressed in the following neither neat nor gaudy costumes: black leather shoes, dirty; suit of boating flannels, very dirty; brown felt hat, much battered; mackintosh, very wet; umbrella. Got a little another drink. We had deceived the boatman at Pangbourne. We had not had the face to tell him that we were running away from the rain. We had left the boat and all it contained in his charge, with instructions that if it was to be ready for us at 9 the next morning, if, we said, if anything unforeseen should happen, preventing our return, we would write to him. We reached Paddington at 7 and drove direct to the restaurant I have before described, where we partook of a light meal, left Montmorency, together with suggestions for a supper to be ready at 10:30, and continued our way to Leicester Square. We attracted a good deal of attention at the Alhambra. On our presenting ourselves at the pay box, we were gruffly directed to go round to Castle Street, and were informed that we were a half an hour behind our time. We convinced the man with some difficulty that we were not the world-renowned contortionists from the Himalaya mountains, and he took our money and let us pass. Inside we were a still greater success. Our fine bronze countenance and picturesque clothes were followed round the place with admiring gaze. We were the cynosure of every eye. It was a proud moment for us all. We adjourned soon after the first ballet and wended our way back to the restaurant where supper was already awaiting us. I must confess to enjoying that supper. For about 10 days we seemed to have been living, more or less, on nothing but cold meat, cake, and bread and jam. It had been a simple, a nutritious diet, but there had been nothing exciting about it. And the odor of burgundy and the smell of French sauces and the sight of clean napkins and long loaves knocked at a very welcome visitor at the door of our inner man. We pegged and quaffed away in silence for a while, until the time came when, instead of sitting bolt upright and grasping the knife and fork firmly, we leant back in our chairs and worked slowly and carelessly, when we stretched out our legs beneath the table, let our napkins fall unheeded to the floor, and found time to more critically examine the smoky ceiling than we had hitherto been able to do, when we rested our glasses at arm's length upon the table, and felt good, and thoughtful, and forgiving. Then Harris, who was sitting next to the window, drew aside the curtain, and looked out upon the street. It glistened darkly in the wet, the dim lamps flickered with each gust. The rain splashed steadily into the puddles and trickled down the waterspouts into the running gutters. A few soaked wayfarers hurried past, crouching beneath their dripping umbrellas, the women holding up their skirts. "Well," said Harris, reaching his hand out for his glass, "we have had a pleasant trip, and my hearty thanks for it to old Father Thames. But I think we did well to chuck it when we did. Here's to 3 men well out of a boat." And Montmorency, standing on his hind legs, before the window, peering out into the night, gave a short bark of a decided concurrence with the toast. The end. Oh my goodness. What a way to end a trip, my dear scholars. Oh, thank you, Dino Game, thank you. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Everything from wanting to kill people in a boat to accidentally nearly killing themselves trying to open up a can of pineapple, to apparently finding a dead woman in a river, to learning about fish stories, and finally deciding that the whole mess was just not worth it and skulking off into a restaurant. It has been quite a journey. And I really enjoyed the book. I really love this book. It is a lot of fun. A lot of the jokes and humor have aged incredibly well. I mean, who hasn't been in some form of situation that they mentioned in it? And it's just been a wonderful time reading it to you. But it is over now. Well, the book's over. I mean, we're not over. So let us discuss the rest of next week. This upcoming Sunday, I will be doing a late night stream, which, Dino Gain, surprisingly timeless for something that is centuries old. Yes, it is surprisingly timeless. And there is a sequel, Three Men on the Brummel, which is about biking and that craze that was happening at the time. Maybe sometime I'll get back to it and we'll see what they're up to when it comes to their bike tour. Um, so Sunday, I will be doing a later night stream, which I will alert you on the time, where I will be reading the first chapter of A Christmas Carol. I am looking forward to that. I'm trying to make it sort of a holiday tradition with me when it comes to my streaming. Oh, thank you for the hydrate, say, oh, welcome. I need the hydrate. And then Tuesday we will be playing more Metal Gear Solid. And then next Thursday we'll be starting a new book. We will be reading, I hope, we'll be reading The Midnight Folk, which is a book I've always wanted to read. It's a British children's fantasy novel, and I am really looking forward to sharing it with you. Um, but I digress. It is getting late, so let's see who we can raid for the evening. Okay. Oh yes, I believe Sophia Ignasi is streaming The Lost Princess of Oz, so we will go visit her. But for now, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we meet each other again in the study, take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye bye.